Start with our council work session for Tuesday, April 7, 2026. First item on our agenda is the 2025 water supply demand and cap update and 2026 water resources implications. And we'll hear from staff.
Good evening. Ty Boreski, Public Works and Utilities Director, here with Justine Schoenbacher, our Water Resources and Conservation Coordinator. And today we're going to give an update on where we ended up in 25 related to water supply, demand, the Greeley cap, and where we're going this year based on some of the conditions we're seeing. So I'm going to go through the first half of this presentation pretty quickly to focus on the second half. But if we want to touch on anything at the end, just feel free, and I'm happy to circle back. So when we look at water supply and demand, from supply, our focus is generally on mountain precipitation in terms of snowpack and temperature, what the melting runoff looks like. That really helps us understand what our CBT quote is going to look like and what we can expect from our ditch systems like Glick. On the demand side, we look more locally at our local precipitation and temperature data, and what really drives the water use, water demand, is outdoor irrigation. So when we see drier, warmer weather, we tend to see more water use. And then on the tail end of that, every year we have growth, we have a change in density, we have efficiency, landscape norms change, price sensitivity to the market, all really kind of change what we can expect to see in terms of water demand. So I'm going to first start by kind of covering the 25 summer temperature and precipitation. As far as temperature goes, we look at deviation from normal, and we were slightly warmer than normal. While much of the state was a little drier than normal, we happen to be kind of right on the line of slightly wetter than we normally see over the summer months. All that being said, we ended up with a pretty large difference in our 2025 projected use that was shared with the City Council and where we ended up in terms of actual water use. So the green numbers are good. That means we use less water than anticipated. That means we're further from Greeley's cap than we thought we were. It also brings into question, what is the best way for us to move forward with projecting demand? Do we use it off of, say, the 2025 projected use, which was based on 2% growth from 24, or do we now use this new 2025 number and take 2% of that? It can be a bit challenging because it is so weather dependent, and generally when Justine and I do this work, we try to provide numbers that are a little more conservative, knowing there is the potential of large deviations in water use based on local temperature and precipitation. And here's how you can see the last 3 years shaping up. So 2025 in green kind of ended up somewhere in the middle between a slightly wetter 2023 and a slightly drier 2024. And so this kind of illustrates the planning horizon issue that we're working with. In 23, we were at 2,300 acre feet. 24, we were at 26. And then in 25, we were at 2,450. So it really creates some difficulty in giving this council a perfect number, but we try to give a range so we can plan accordingly. So now I'm going to get into some of the negative news. And so this was shared with the Water and Sewer Board. So I'm going to show the data based on when I presented to them and the data when I prepared this presentation. And so when we shared our statewide winter snowpack, so looking at the kind of snowpack across all of the watersheds in the state, things were looking lower and a little worse than expected, but there was still some room for recovery. More recently, that has showed a pretty major shift downwards. And so if you look at this bottom graph, you see March and May, we are about 1 full month behind ahead of where we would normally be this time of year. So things are never really reached the peak we were hoping, and things are running off really quickly. Weather. And here's what that looks like in terms of individual watersheds. So we're more focused on the watersheds to the northern side of the state that impact the CBT system. And then, you can see the south side of the state. Southwest Colorado is really struggling. Things are not looking great on our side of the state, but definitely doing a little better than we could expect down in Upper Rio Grande, Gunnison area. So with all of that being said, I'm going to move into some of the water supply and demand projections for 26. And generally, when we look at this info, we look at some of the long-term projections on, what is the drought looking like across the country? What's it looking like more locally? What are we expecting in terms of temperature and precipitation, just based on some of the federal government's weather models. And so here's the drought situation on 2/28 when we prepared this for Water and Sewer Board. You can see Colorado is generally in the drought persist or drought development likely. You can see by 3/19 a pretty dramatic shift across the western U.S. with a lot more of the drought development likely, and the drought persisting has changed quite a bit, which means some of the areas that we thought were drought development likely in February are now in drought conditions. So pretty major shift there. Statewide, very similar story. So you can kind of see the intensity of the drought across the state. We were in the kind of moderate, severe, abnormally dry type classification. We haven't changed at all based on the overall state situation, but you can see a pretty dramatic shift in northwestern Colorado, which is the watersheds that serve a lot of northern Colorado. So pretty concerning back and forth between just over a month. And then finally, we look at the seasonal temperature and seasonal precipitation outlook. So going into our Water and Sewer Board presentation, we were looking at above average temperatures and below average seasonal precipitation, mirroring some of the data across the nation that I shared earlier. Things are looking pretty significantly worse than they were a month ago. You can see that shift mainly in the western, southwestern United States. All that being said, when we looked at water use for this year, we had that predicament of what should be shared with council. So we decided to share both with you. So we have two categories on the right side. That's taking the 2026 projected use from the 24 data, which was higher, and then taking the 2026 projected use from the 2025 data, this most recent year, which was lower, and then we add a 2% increase to that. And so based on this number, we're looking at somewhere between 2,500 and 2,700 acre feet of water anticipated for the potable side. And I know this council is really interested in what does that mean for our cap. And for those not familiar, we pay the city of Greeley for treatment, and we have a certain amount of water that we refer to as our cap that is covered under the existing agreement. As we get closer and surpass that cap, we are expected to pay under the IGA system development fees to the city of Greeley. So generally, we've been looking at this in 3-year increments. And so based on the two scenarios I shared in 2026, we are looking to be under the cap in both scenarios, so between 265 and 48 acre feet above the cap. And then as we look at 27 and 28, that's where things are a little less certain with the wide range. So if we take the less conservative approach, we in 27 and 28 would still be under the cap. But when we start looking things from increasing from that higher water use year, there is a possibility that we end up 6 acre feet over the cap in 27 and 55 acre feet over the cap in 2028. And you can see that summarized in the bar graph with the blue representing that lower water use scenario and orange kind of showing where we end up with that higher water use scenario. In terms of finances, every acre foot has a tieback directly to the IGA we have with Greeley. So in these scenarios, we range from being under the cap to over the cap. So I'm showing a range of potential cap expenses. 2026, we don't expect having to pay into the city of Greeley. In 27, there's a chance we end up slightly over with that 6.4 acre feet. That would be around $233,000. And then if we hit that full 55 acre feet that were projected in 2028, we're looking at just over $2.1 million to the Greeley cap. So key takeaways in terms of supply, demand, and the cap, it's really dependent on temperature and precipitation. We need to plan around the just annual fluctuation we see in weather conditions. Funding our CAP account remains important. It's something we talk about and we have talked about it the last few times we've given this presentation. I think it just, the uncertainty really shows that we need to be prepared for worst case, although the likelihood is up in the air. As we've discussed in some of our other presentations, we need to make sure that future development includes non-pot irrigation. Proactivity in our water conservation program is important. There's a high ROI for every acre foot of potable water we save. That's one less acre foot towards our Greeley cap. And then Justine and I, as we move into next year, we're kind of reassessing how to present this info in the two scenarios. So this may take a different form next year because we want to give as good of an estimate as possible to City Council to understand our water situation. So maybe I'll just break it down here. Any questions on the first half before we move into the 2026 and potential drought conditions? Perfect. So the City of Evans has a drought management plan on the record from 2013, and it was done in response to the 2012 drought and adopted. We have funded and have started working towards a conservation and drought management plan update for 2026, which is great that we're doing it, but unfortunate in terms of the timing of this year that it happens to be a potential drought year. And so when we look at drought in terms of the 2013 plan, it takes an approach using a water supply index, the WSI. I've kind of highlighted the most important elements here in terms of annual fluctuation, but generally we take CBT, supplies and carryover, GLIC supplies and carryover, GLIC storage, and then we divide it by 2-year water demand and maximizing CBT rollover. Generally, the things that change here are GLIC supplies, given that's a supply that's a little less certain every year and more prone to changes from drought conditions, and 2-year water demand, right? You know, we saw a 200 acre foot span between our higher water use and lower water use scenarios, so that 2-year water demand can look very differently depending on how we model the data. And so the WSI spits out number in terms of a percentage. So if we're over 120%, it's considered sustainable. That's kind of our normal year. No response targets in terms of water reduction. As we move down the list, we enter warning, critical, severe, all for slightly lesser WSI numbers, and all of them have associated water demand reduction goals. And so tracking WSI, this is, I think a good way to look at it. So the maximum on record from the last 25 years was at 196%. Generally, we see around that 139%. If we look at the last 2 droughts, we were at 94% in that warning, and to date, we are at 86%. And I put an asterisk by this because that's looking at only the GLIC dividends issued to date. We know that GLIC dividends will continue to be issued. But I wanted to show this number because this is where we're at as of today, and the next slide will show where we're at based on where we anticipate our GLIC projections to end up. So this just has one line shift, and so we do project that in 2026, based on average GLIC drought dividends, so looking at the 2 worst drought years we've had in the last 25 years, if we take GLIC through the rest of the year with those numbers, we will end up at a 91% WSI. And so there are demand side response measures associated with these 2 phases. So I did say we're projected at that 91% level, which is in kind of the warning side of things. And so that requires mandatory watering restrictions consistent with the Evans Municipal Code as it exists today. So 3 days a week, April 15th to October 15th. The one major change from what's on the code today with a 91% WSI is a variance is required for new sod, and no variances are issued between June 15th and August 31st. So that's kind of the one change. As we push towards the critical side, that's 70 to 89%. That's when our mandatory watering restrictions change slightly. So we have no watering up until that April 15th deadline. Then we do 2 days a week between April and May 15th, and then 3 days a week as is written normally from May 15th to September 14th. Just like in the previous, there's a variance required for new sod, with none being issued between June 15th and August 31st. We would prohibit power washing or spraying of impervious surfaces, and the critical phase specifically calls out for City Council to consider drought surcharges. So currently we're at that kind of 86 number. We anticipate to be 91, which is in the warning category, but I wanted to share critical just as a point of reference. And so in detail, here's what the Evans Municipal Code for water conservation measures looks like today. So it was adopted actually before the 2013 Drought Management Plan was officially released. Previously, City Council considered restrictions annually. And so I think most of you are familiar with this. It's 3 days a week of outdoor watering, segmented by address. So even and odd numbers have associated days of the week that they are allowed to water, with no watering allowed between noon and 5 p.m. Noon and 5 p.m. is a little different than we see in some of our other northern Colorado communities, which tend to be closer to the 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. window, but just something to take note of. And then if drought conditions occur, City Council by resolution may declare a drought emergency and implement appropriate procedures under the most current drought management plan. So just looking at other municipalities, we can see that the bulk of our neighbors are looking at stage 1 restrictions, or their kind of version of our current Evans Municipal Code. We're seeing a lot of no mandatory restrictions, fully voluntary, but just a point of reference of where we're at and where our neighbors are. We did speak with the city of Greeley. They said they weren't anticipating mandatory restrictions, but they hadn't made a formal declaration at the time we reached out to them. So final kind of considerations with this conversation is there is a financial impact associated with drought emergency declarations and restrictions. So we do generally see a reduction in water sales, so less revenue for the water fund from drought stage implementations, which is great. We want people to use less water, they are, but on the tail end, there's headaches for Jackie and myself on decreased revenue. Like I mentioned in the critical slide, the drought plan does mention drought surcharges if things end up in a dire situation, but it is not something that's included in the warning phase above 90 WSI. And then finally, neighboring community coordination. It's just always easier to communicate drought in a similar way to neighbors. That may be challenging because we have neighbors on both sides of the equation right now, with Greeley not expecting and others in phase 1. But it generally does make communication easier, and I'm sure all of you have seen the news. It seems like every night there's a new community with a drought restriction in place. So finally, staff recommendations. So we're recommending following the 2013 Drought Management Plan, so following that WSI-based guidance. This would involve us setting a drought stage at the warning level based on us projecting that we're going to finish the year at 91% WSI. This would require declaring a drought emergency by resolution, and we would set an internal focus on communication and education. Our goal is to inform our community, to keep them up to date, to ensure they understand our restrictions that are in place and are currently in our Evans Municipal Code. However, we have had internal conversations about enforcement mechanisms if we do see a number of violations occurring at the same residence, if we're getting a lot of complaints, and staff has looked to put together some door hangers and work with code enforcement on enforcing that. So staff would also recommend amending Title 13 of the Evans Municipal Code to formally restrict outdoor irrigation prior to April 15th and after October 15th. That's something we noticed this year was potentially problematic because there are no restrictions in place prior to April 15th. There's no minimum days. Generally, our non-pot system doesn't come into play until April 15th, so most of the watering we see prior to April 15th and after October 15th are from potable sources or potable interconnects. So I think this could take a few different forms. We could prohibit it completely. We could just set the same Evans Municipal Code dates that we have throughout the rest of the year, but I think it's definitely something that we should look at changing, along with potentially updating our hours from noon to 5 to something like 10 to 6, because 11 and 12 o'clock, there's quite a bit of warm temperatures of evapotranspiration. Having a 12 o'clock seems a bit later than current best management practices. So direction from City Council. Is City Council interested in pursuing a resolution for a drought emergency at the warning stage, implementing measures under the 2013 plan? And is City Council interested in pursuing an amendment to Title 13 to restrict outdoor irrigation and potentially change some of the associated hours? Anything you would like to add, Cody?
The only thing that I have, we talked with City Attorney this afternoon. If there's interest in making any changes, then we could also look at doing that via an emergency ordinance. Rather than having a first and second reading, we would come back with City Council, if desired, with an emergency ordinance for the council's consideration that would effectively make that ordinance in effect after one reading. So we have some ability to move on this quicker now that we see the numbers, now that we know what the snow melt looks like, now that we're getting a better idea of what this spring and summer most likely will look like. We have some options to move pretty quickly if the City Council would like, and especially if we're going to be looking at that drought emergency at the warning levels. So, Mr. Mayor, with that, I'll turn it over to Council for consideration.
Great, thank you, Cody, and thank you, Ty, for the great presentation as everything. I do have a question for you. When you spoke with Greeley, what was their reasoning behind not wanting to implement any restrictions at this time?
Yeah, so speaking from my conversation and personal experience from working over there, they have a water resources portfolio for over 400,000 people. They're at about 125, so they have ample water supply, and they have had some recent revenue issues related to conservation measures and how successful they've been. So I think they're looking at it from a spot where they have a growth-oriented water resources portfolio they feel like is ample. They're generally not worried about drought conditions until their consecutive years, and so they're kind of putting the revenue implications ahead of the neighboring communities that are kind of pushing some of the restrictions.
Thank you for the presentation. I would rather be proactive than reactive, and I would rather go ahead and get the restrictions in place. I would like to change it to 10 to 6 every day, and I would like to make that year-round as well. I've already had complaints from many people in my neighborhood of people watering every day, multiple times a day, and that's just, I know, things that you hear. But we do need to restrict that, and even I need to know we all need to know it for business purposes to answer their questions as well. My only question is, I saw that it mentions power washing being prohibited if it gets to the extreme. What about, and I know we started to talk about this, but we didn't get to finish, what about pools? Because I know a lot of multifamilies have pools, but I didn't realize how many people here in Evans had pools. And I'm not saying I don't want anybody to have those or enjoy them, but is that like I don't know, I guess a big use of water, or would that really affect any of those?
So when we looked at this, we went specifically on the 2013 drought management plan, and the measures, and pools were not identified. So that's something we could definitely discuss as part of the update to the plan, but we really wanted to stick with the mandatory restrictions that are in the plan as is, because the Evans Municipal Code kind of points back to that as where we have to go. But I wouldn't imagine it's a huge number. It's a one-time fill, probably dwarfed by outdoor irrigation. But it's definitely something we could look into with the update.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Councilmember Neal?
Yes, Ty, do you happen to know what Greeley's hours of restrictions are? Is it 10 to 6, or are they still 12 to 5?
I believe they're 10 to 6. I can double check on that, or I believe they're 10 to 6. I can double check on that though.
It'd be helpful if we just decide, because I think we need to change it. I've seen too many people over the years still watering in the middle of the afternoon, and it's just ridiculous.
Yep, verified 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. at Greeley.
Thank you. So, and just for the, for the simple consistency of it, would be nice too. But, by 10 o'clock on summer days, it's way too hot to be watering, in my opinion, and 6 o'clock, the same. I used to get off work at 3 o'clock in the afternoon at Montford and come home and turn on the swamp cooler and take a nap till 9 o'clock or so, and then I'd go out and move the hoses all, for till 2 o'clock in the morning. And it's no fun doing it in the dark, but it's a lot cooler, and sometimes, even at 9 o'clock, it's still in the high 70s, 80s in the summertime. So, and I agree that we need to probably do an emergency thing on this to get it, because it's too close to implementing watering officially. So we need to probably get that in an ordinance and get it.
So real quick, just for clarification, are you saying not the critical, but go to the stage after? Okay, I just wanted to clarify what you're saying, because there's the different stages that you pointed out, the one where there was critical and then the severe. Are you talking about implementing the severe one?
Yes.
Okay. Or, I mean, sorry, the critical, I meant, excuse me. Yes.
Critical.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
Sorry.
No, that's good. I thought that's where you were going. That's why I just asked for clarification on it.
Hopefully it doesn't go to severe, but I have a bad feeling that this is going to be a windy, hot, dry summer. No moisture.
Councilmember Crabtree?
Yeah, great presentation, thank you. When we put the restrictions in place, how effective are they? What's our actual response from consumers?
That's a great question, because we haven't had this plan into effect since the drought. So I think this year will be interesting to track year over year. I don't know if we have any expectations of where it'll end up. It'll definitely be something I can report back on once we have the data, though.
So I've always been a big fan of attacking things through an economic standpoint, and why aren't we just adjusting the rates instead of putting on restrictions and saying, don't do this and don't do that? If someone wants to water their lawn and burn money, let them burn money, but they're going to pay for it. So I've really liked what we've done with a 3-tiered system, right? Why don't we just add more fees onto it? If you're using more gallons, you spend more money. And then we naturally would choke back that consumption, and we would organically throttle back people watering. And then we could take the resources instead of enforcing restrictions and just educate the public. That's the angle I would like to take.
It leads to the neighbors seeing people watering, and then they're not.
Well, it's a different perspective of water management.
And my neighborhood doesn't have meters on the non-potable system, so you couldn't measure how much they're using, even though I know it gets shut off, but,
Yeah.
we're not
This is not
metered,
bad.
so if they water 3 times a day or all week, you can't charge
In a
them for it.
non-potable area, so
I am too, but
focus on that side of it.
But I also think,
Focus on that.
I think for the people that don't have the non-pot too, and that just want to continue to water, yeah, it's going to cost them more, but at the end of the day, it's going to cost the entire city more money, because we're going to hit that cap number quicker.
Yep.
Because people are going to use more and more water, because, hey, we're in a drought, we're not getting the water, I got to keep my lawn green or whatever. It's just going to cause that domino effect for the rest of the city hitting that cap number sooner rather than later.
First $600 water bill, they'll stop watering pretty quick.
You'd hope.
But that's why I posed the first question, is how are we going to enforce it, and does the enforcement actually work?
Yeah, so we've had a lot of internal conversations related to enforcement and how we can use our code enforcement team to potentially correct some of the behaviors that are not compliant with our municipal code. And so we've discussed a warning violation system. So 2 warnings where we focus on education. Then the third is more of the punitive side of things. We will see how it goes and be able to report back, but I don't know in 2012 or what the focus was on enforcement. Generally, utilities don't have the resources for enforcement, and so they do take other approaches. I think if we were to move forward with an additional rate tier, that is definitely something we can discuss. I think we would probably have to budget in adding non-pot meters through the whole system. One of the challenges we run into is we have pressurized non-pot customers, we have potable only customers, then we have ditch customers. However, it's really hard to communicate water restrictions across different classes because people don't really necessarily understand where they fall in those three options. So when we look at watering restrictions, that's kind of why we're looking at it universally. Look at the municipal code. Are you following? If not, we'll follow down this route of door tagging with kind of 2 educational violations, then potentially punitive.
Hopefully they follow what we put in front of us. Thanks.
Councilmember Delaney?
Yeah, quick question. When does the IGA get renewed?
For Greeley's cap, I want to say we just renewed it in the last year or so. So I think it was 10-year.
At least another 8 years.
Yep. That's all I have.
Councilmember Johnson?
So from October 15th through April 14th, what is the typical usage through all
So generally,
types?
generally we refer to that. So we kind of have the shoulder seasons, then we have what we call average winter consumption. That's generally what we would just say is average winter use. So just what you're using for toilets, showers, cooking. In years like this, where we have irrigation starting earlier for people who feel like their grass is dying instead of still dormant, you see a pretty big uptick. We can share that data when we get it. So we get all of our billing kind of lagged from the city of Greeley on the potable side, but we can report back on what this March looks like versus past March.
So the non-pot, we know it typically isn't used during that time frame. But the
Correct.
potable water, is it used during October 15th and April 14th?
It can be.
But is it used?
Generally, no, but in warmer years, yes. So anyone running irrigation right now, that's potable water because we have no non-pot or ditch water available.
So during a drought season, technically, or when it's warmer, like, which is an anomaly, because typically you wouldn't have that. Okay, so that was an interesting perspective, your idea. But I also do agree that we need to ensure that the cap's not met. Is it possible, just because I know the warning component, it just has 3 days a week as normal, can we just do like a calendar year, just have the 3, because I think we do 3, the 3 days a week throughout the entire year, just keep it as such versus going from one extreme to the other, because typically people don't water based off what you're stating unless we have this anomaly. And just based off historical events, so when we had the 2002 drought, in 2023 we had the blizzard that happened, which kind of corrected that drought. And then in 2012, when we had the drought plan, it was like kind of being created, we had the 2023 flood, which corrected the drought. And since then we haven't. So if the cycle continues, that means next year something big will be happening. So we should be proactive in that sense. But anyway, so it seems that every big kind of drought moment, it has corrected itself. So that's the reason why I let's just keep the 3 days throughout the entire year and see what that looks like versus, stating no watering for that time frame.
The only difference I'll point out is that in this season, it is all potable water. So during most of that period that we do 3 days a week, over half the city has access to non-pot water. During that March period, that up to April 15th, that is 100% potable, 100% eating into Greeley's cap. And so, it is potentially a way to ensure that we don't raise that cap in our drought years and then only get up to it the next drought 10 years from now based on that cycle of every 10 years. So I think we look at it a little differently. It's not just water resources, for us, it's that water treatment cap.
Have you done the modeling if you were to do it the same throughout the calendar year during that time frame and seeing what that would look like for cap purposes?
We wouldn't, I don't think we'd be able to model what March and April look like outside of drought years. So this year will be a really good indicator, because we can see from March 1st to April 15th, what does our water look like compared to a normal year. I would anticipate we may be even doubling what we see in a normal year. I've seen quite a bit of watering out there that we normally don't see this time of year. We can report back on it. We don't have that data. I don't even think we could model it with the data we have available.
But I do think there's the potential, thinking about Councilman Crabtree's question a little bit ago.
Yeah.
I do think that there's an opportunity, because Ty, you're absolutely correct, it will be 100% potable on the shoulders. But I do think that there's the opportunity for kind of some economic constraints to dictate consumer activity to some degree. I mean, this is definitely an anomaly. This year is. Are we going to experience this every year? Certainly hope not. And so that's something that Ty and I had discussed is, does it make sense to carry that 3-day watering restriction 12 months out of the year, which I think would then address your idea or your approach as well. And I think Ty is correct. We do not have a lot of data right now, because we typically do not see so much watering during the March-April timeframe. So we don't have a lot of data to work off of.
And that's kind of why I was bringing, because I really liked his perspective. It was just like a total flip in thinking. It's like thinking outside the box. But then I was like, okay, instead of the 3-day would kind of help both causes in a sense, but we don't know because we haven't done any kind of information. But going back to what I mentioned, the 2002 and the 2012, is there any data from those drought years that we can look back on and say, hey, what did that look like for us? And how do we tackle those specific times during those drought years in the city? Which is why I brought those two events up.
We can look back. I think the data has changed quite a bit with our metering system. So we've updated to basically full AMI, which is regular check-ins, versus the old mechanical meters that we were kind of phasing out at the time of the last drought. So I would say that the data isn't great. Plus, we've had so much change in the community density. After 2012, we actually saw a huge reduction in water use every year since. And so behaviors change permanently after drought. And so I would anticipate the 2012 data probably wouldn't be anything we'd feel comfortable making a decision off of. This data we get from this will be much better at a higher level with the modern AMI tools.
Okay, so based off that, there's a potential, if we did the 3-day calendar year, with the potential of seeing, Councilmember Crabtree's perspective on things, that just with even announcing the critical status, that would change behavior based off of past.
I think so. I think we would have this year as our March, April baseline. And then if we do 3 days a week, or if we do a restriction, we will have data for every year after that to compare it to. This will be this is the control. From now on, it's the data that comes out after it. If we get back-to-back drought years, we'll have that data right away. If we don't have another one for 10 years, it may be a while.
So for your control, you would be controlling, sorry, just one last one,
yeah.
one last thing. So for your control, you'll be using control for just potable water, because non-pot per specific subdivisions, and some of them are not metered. So that would be kind of skewed.
It's only potable in March and April. So we will have the March and April day this year, which was not restricted. So that'll be that control. And then every year, if we do a 3-day restriction or a complete restriction, we'll have that data moving forward. We don't have it going into this year.
Thank you, Ty.
Thank you.
Councilmember Neal?
Well, I know there are people out there that the minute they think that freezing temperatures are gone, start watering. And fortunately it's not very many, but there are some out there that do that. They want that green lawn, and then they kind of get the monkey see, monkey do effect, because their neighbors want to have a green lawn and don't want to, or a lot of them do. And it's a ripple effect when you get people out there watering before the official start of the irrigation system. And I agree that some people need to water trees and some things. I've lost 2 rose bushes again this year from not watering. Hopefully we can re-educate the people that this needs to be done. And it's kind of tough to do sometimes.
So is that all you got?
Yep, that's it.
All right, so just so we can give direction to staff, are we wanting to implement the critical stage of it or keep it in the warning stage? I know Councilmember Neal said he wanted to go to the more restrictive and the critical. It's at 86%, even though it's projected at 91. Or do we want to just go ahead and leave it at that 3 days a week based on the address, the odds and the evens, and the multifamily?
I think warning.
Warning.
I pick warning.
All right, so there you go.
But could we add the caveat though of just, I don't know if people feel, if we on council feel that taking the 3-day throughout a calendar year would be best, because that's not.
Well,
that's not
I
really
would,
Do for the year, like not just restrict from April to October.
Like readdress.
Readdress.
I would like to readdress. What's
yeah, I'd say like to readdress that, not maybe,
hours, days.
yeah, hours, days, all that, but at a later time, yes.
Perfect.
So hours and days later, and do the warning now.
Yes.
Correct.
So maintain the 12 PM to 5 PM restriction now.
I understood it. I sounded like most people want it 10 to 6. Let's just double check.
So are
10 to
we,
6.
because that's addressing the time.
Right. So
I'm okay with 10 to 6.
I'm okay with 10 to 6, yes.
10 to
Okay.
6.
10 to
So
6.
then we will adjust that to 10 AM to 6 PM, but we'll keep the 3 days a week.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
I will bring back an ordinance at the next council meeting for your consideration.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, got a couple of minutes, so we'll head up to the dais and we'll get started promptly.